Yeah, I thought, so the sort of the generic trend for what we've been working on at the moment between the research team at Twitter is pretty much focused around this sort of one concept, that how can we stop, and we know that it's systematic of where we've got to by now. And it's also systematic of how the digital industry sort of created itself, is that we love to count things. And unfortunately, media loves it when we do count things as well. They love it when we say, what's the top hashtag this year? How many people talk about Trump? Is BTS really everything there is to know about Twitter? You know, so all of these types of things, and people look at it in a very sort of volumetric point of view. But what we've been doing for the last maybe sort of 2 years or so is sort of enjoying on a voyage of different discovery around how can we use this as a listening point of view. Where does this all start? This all starts with one word that I think personally I've sort of been a bit obsessed with, and it's the word online. Now, any time that we do anything and we talk to people about their social media, the obsession with being online is really at the forefront of absolutely every single thing they do. Whether it's in a dangerous environment, I mean, there actually is like, joke lanes for people to use their devices. But again, it was mentioned before about like in Indonesia, people, they've got no qualms of going into a restaurant and saying like, what's your Wi-Fi code, before they've even ordered. So I think it's really interesting that we seem to be sort of dominated by this word to be online. We also know that globally, the average amount of time we spend online is about 5 hours. This is the average amount of time. If you go places like Philippines or India and you see how much downtime people have, I'll give you an interesting stat. In the first couple of weeks, the Indian Rail Network opened up free, fast Wi-Fi on all of their platforms. In fact, I think it's only on 2/3 at the moment. There was more people accessing the Wi-Fi on Indian platforms that were actually activating or actually going online in the UK on the same particular day. That just shows you the scale at which some of these changes will bring more people. We also know, and as part of the social media community, we also know that nearly about 80% of total online interactions are through some sort of social media platform. And we're capturing tons and tons of data. So the idea is, and to give you an idea as to the rough size of that data, we actually see 500 million tweets every single day. Every single day, globally, 500 million people tweet or retweet something on our platform. What's really super interesting, and maybe a bit of an insight for some of you guys in the room, is that 80% of this activity actually exists outside of the US. And within Southeast Asia, we actually see some of the fastest markets in terms of Twitter growth. I've missed my dawning slide. I'm going to show you because I quite like the photo. Let me go back one. Oh, okay, it's not going to show up. But the other way which we're talking about this is what if we stop thinking about this as counting the data, and what about if we do think this as the world's largest focus group? Because potentially, that's what it could live up to. So, however though, when we sort of look back in time and we look back at ourselves and we look back at what agencies or clients want to hear, a lot of the social media data, especially a lot of the Twitter data, was focused on the quantitative side. People want to see short-term brand uplifts. They want to see how many times their tweet has been mentioned. I've been in so many client presentations where the client is like, that's great, but I'm an anti-dandruff shampoo. How many times has my product been mentioned? We're like, well, probably none. But this is the type of questions that we get asked. So we're trying to sort of rebrand ourselves, and we're trying to focus a little way. And what we're actually thinking about is what are the questions that Twitter data should be really asking. I'll give you a good example. In the last 4 weeks, and this has been the same for a long time now, in the last 4 weeks, there'll be over 1 million conversations using the hashtag climate change. However, if you use a lot of the platforms that we do use, or in social listening tools and things like this, what it will actually do, because it's all based around different algorithms, is actually only 35% of these will have a recognized emotion. I challenge anybody in this room to write a tweet about climate change and not be either positive or negative or angry or sad or, you know, annoyed or frustrated. You know, it's impossible. You know, it's almost impossible. This is not like a patsy, you know, movement. Climate change is really real and it's happening, people. So, what were the sort of I'll just give you some of the big, more sort of qualitative answers that we're looking for. The first one was, funny enough, I've just been just now, the first one is around the travel industry. What we wanted to do was, rather than just be those people that counted the number of, number of times Busan has been mentioned, what we wanted to do is we wanted to go off and do an explorative project where how can we look into Twitter data? How can it really show us some of the motivating forces to visiting a destination? But plus also, what if we really digged into it? And what about if we looked at it in a more holistic stage? What if we weren't sit there searching just for why am I visiting Australia? We're looking at things like Barrier Reef, Ayers Rock, all things like this. What about if we look at Twitter data in a different perspective? And what about if we say, you know, I'm a potential tourist from India, and I'm opening Twitter and I'm thinking about what is it that I see? What's my perception of Australia when I look through this particular lens? That project is one of the most interesting projects that we've done so far, because every single tourism board has been more interested in, okay, this is great. For years we've been told why people are coming here, but what we want you to tell us from now on why people might not be coming here. And so it's really sort of super fascinating from that point of view. Prerna's going to give us a little bit more depth about how do we explore the role of streamed content in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia, including India, is one of the largest battlegrounds for the streaming partners there'll ever be. I don't know anybody, this is a good test if anybody's on Twitter, but if you are on Twitter, go and have a look at the tweet that Disney Plus put out yesterday. It's actually the longest tweet storm that comes from one client, and they did a screen grab of every single title that will be uploaded onto their service at launch. It went absolutely crazy. What we're working with these people is they want to understand the more complex environment. They know that they just can't put out content and everybody within the region. So they really want to understand not just how does their product exist, but how can we use Twitter data to truly understand those moments when people want to stream content. Another one, which we're working with the Quilt guys, is around, and this is probably one of the most challenging ones that we've got coming up, is around how can we show a different side to the Twitter conversation in India? If you switch on the news, if you open Times of India, if you go through any sort of publication, what you'll find at the moment is there's a very negative perception as to what's happening on Twitter. But we know this isn't true. What we need, therefore, is to approach it in a different way. And we're not just putting in like an endless string of words around happy or sad or angry, because when do we start and when do we stop? So this is where sort of a qualitative machine learning is really sort of kicking in. And the last one, which we've yet to tackle, is how can we go above the obvious when it comes to gaming? Gaming is one of the broadest, most interesting, diverse sectors that we work with. We've got people talking to us about micro-moment games, a game which you can play for less than 5 seconds. And we've got people talking to us about games that you can only play if it's ever going to be 5G broadband, and you're going to go into like a battleground and you're going to play against 100 people, and we're going to look for micropayments. So the industry is completely stretched, and how people are talking about games has never been sort of more varied. So this is a challenge that we're going to look to in 2020 to tackle. So look, before I hand over to Prerna, I just want to give you a bit of insight as to how we've been working together. Hopefully all good. She's nodding and smiling. But no, look, I mean, I think the thing is the one thing that we've been doing a lot of is not really having to have like the fully fleshed brief out there. And I think what the guys at Circus have been really good at is really sort of just coming and wanting to join us on the mission and really sort of to explore. So let me just hand over to Prerna. It will take you through one of the projects that we've been working on together.
So much, Martin. And I think, just for some background, I think I've probably been hounding Martin for only like 3 years or 5 years or 10 or something like that before we started working together. And I think one of the constraints that you sometimes have with clients is exactly what you just said, Martin, which is like, what's the brief? Let's have a really specific brief. Let's start from something that's really specific, especially when it comes to something as unstructured and large as social media. And so I think one of the things that, we always try to do is encourage our clients to go beyond what we call the old way. And the old way is really looking at data in the social and digital ecosystem in a very quantitative fashion. So the old way for me is really like, let's look at how many likes we got today, and let's look at Trump being the top tweet of the day, or how many, what was the volume of mentions that I got for my brand over a certain period of time. And forcing ourselves to look at social media data, Twitter data, Naver data, Pantip data, data from social media and digital ecosystems as the new way. And so this is kind of what Martin was talking about. This is the world's largest focus group that's available online. And so looking at it in terms of demand spaces and triggers and barriers and consumer behavior is how Circus Social looks at social media. So none of this would be possible, of course, if we didn't have a fantastic team. And one of my extremely talented and smart team members is sitting right at this front table over here, Kay. So if you want to ask her any of the tough questions, she'll be there for you later. But we've built a platform that's called 2020 for perfect vision into your digital ecosystem that pulls in all of this social media data. Our specialty really is doing Asian scripts, languages, platforms, etc. Doesn't mean we don't do the rest of the world, but it just means we do Asia and the Middle East kind of better than anybody else. We have also brought together a bunch of really smart market research experts that can take some of these methodologies and apply them to this data. And so although, we recognize some of the limitations that traditional research sometimes has. So this is things around like, you find stuff that moves in a brand tracker, you don't really know why. We help you answer those types of questions. Or there's a move towards a shorter LOI. And how do you really tackle that in the traditional world, as we call it? Or having a limited time or a very long processing time when it comes to field work. And that's where we think digital data can really complement a lot of the work that I'm sure all of you guys in the room are doing today, in terms of giving you both quant and qual, getting real-time, real sentiments, and being able to kind of process them much faster. And I know this was shared by many other companies earlier today, as well as having a larger scope of data to look at, being able to go back in time to do that. So first I'm going to talk about something that we did in the travel industry, like Martin mentioned. I think this was only a small part of the very large project that Twitter actually embarked on in the travel industry. So I'll give you some of the interesting nuggets that we got from our study. It was done in 4 markets. It was done in China, even though Twitter is not accessible in China, UAE, India, and Australia. But it also looked at global conversations happening about these destinations, happening about why I want to travel to these. So as you can see, this was basically the brief that we got from Martin. As broad as it is, like what are the main motivators and barriers? How do we market to different types of consumer profiles? What are the key kind of positive and negative themes associated with different destinations? And then what are some of the opportunity areas? So we started broad. And I think this is something that we've done now time and time again, working with different types of clients. So you kind of always start, this is our kind of methodology on how we get from information to insights. So we always start with kind of identification. So this is going broad, making sure we have the right searches that we put into the platform. Then we introspect on those and we tweak them, we tighten them, we optimize them. Inspiration is where we might sample some of those raw conversations and then try to make sense of them. Then we'll actually take both a quant and a qual approach to start making sense of those before we finally get to the insights. So this requires both. This requires a really smart platform that can do this for you, and then also really great humans and market researchers that can look at this from a qual perspective. So I think the first thing that was very interesting that we found is that we found two types of profiles, and some of you may know this from a study that was done by Elliott et al. In 2001 on two types of people. There's kind of approach-motivated people and then avoidance-motivated people. And we could see this from the Twitter sphere as well, that your approach-motivated people always talked about like looking for the next best thing, what are the new attractions, a festival, like the new novel thing that they were talking about in destinations. Versus you're kind of avoidance motivated, like, oh, I want to go to Australia because it's safe, or I want to go to Singapore because it's clean, or et cetera, which is you're trying to avoid certain stimuli, and that's why you will be more motivated to travel to that place. And this can be really nicely weaved into the story of how you market to these types of profiles when it comes to different destinations as well. So some of the main themes that we found, and again, these can't be found if you just do a hashtag for like, how many times was hashtag Australia or hashtag Sydney mentioned? But of course, you need to look further and start looking at the different attributes within locations that are being talked about in a positive way. We're not going to show you the negatives, of course, today. Just some of the great positive stuff, which is, around the UAE, like, what were some of the main things that were coming up? And people were talking about different types of destinations. Now, I just want to say, if I'm running a search for UAE, it's going to be very difficult for me to put in like UAE and every single attraction in the UAE. You kind of start broad and broader, and then you go down based on the qualitative lens that you can then start putting to the data and figuring out like why are people traveling to these destinations and not just looking at the raw data before coming up with insights. So even for a place like India, we kind of split it, even though it can potentially be split in many, many more ways. We did north, south, east, west, and within each region, we looked for, within the positive sentiment, what is being talked about with a positive sentiment, and what are the opportunity areas that certain tourism boards can start to tap into. So is it views, or is it the fact that there's a lot of maybe discussion happening about water scarcity, security, etc. Very different from maybe what was happening in the East. And in the East, there was a lot about, there was a lot of positive conversation about the different sites you could visit, even though the East is not one of the most popular tourist destinations maybe in India, provides great opportunities for the government to market it as a destination. Then we worked on this entertainment report, and this is the one that Martin was just talking about a minute ago, which is how do people kind of consume paid online streaming entertainment. Again, we try to look deeper into the data that we got from Twitter, into what are some of the cultural nuances that we could find, what are some of the key decision-making factors when people are consuming this type of data, and then TV series versus movies, like who's really winning in Southeast Asia. Whoops. Okay. I'm just going to start with this slide, and I know that's like the font's really small and you guys can't read it, so I'll just give you a couple of the interesting things that we found. In the Philippines, every time a local TV series has a new show, has a new episode that comes out, people in the Twitter universe give it a unique hashtag and make it the top trend for that day. That was not something that we knew at all when we kind of embarked on this study. Versus maybe a place like India, where if you look at how movies are marketed and talked about, there's different phases to that. And all of this is discussed on Twitter. And so it gives opportunities to brands to kind of, what's happening at the trailer, then what's happening when the theme song is released, how people are discussing that is so different, versus a place like Korea, as an example, where internet connectivity is not an issue. So that's not really something that people talk about. People start to go down and talk about things like, does this have subtitles in Korean if I'm watching at home? Is this dubbed in Korean if I'm watching on mobile? Is this available in HD? Because I only want to watch it in HD. Versus Thailand, where there are Twitter groups and Facebook groups and kind of these communities that you can join because everybody's very price conscious. So they share Netflix IDs. Hopefully nobody from Netflix in the room. Okay. So they share Netflix IDs with each other, and then they split the cost to be like, all right, if it costs X in a month, I'm going to split it amongst 5 people. You can join a group and share it with like random people that you don't even know. So very, very interesting behavior that's all discussed on Twitter, by the way. Twitter was the only source of data that we used for this study. Then even when it comes to binge watching, I'm just going to highlight 2 things on this slide. One, which is very, very interesting, is that, Thailand is the only market where locals binge watch Thai TV series. In every other market in Southeast Asia and Korea, people binge watch international TV series. But Thailand is the only place where people talk about binge watching local TV series. And this was also very surprising for us. Very interesting. We also looked into like what are some of the, and this is only results from Indonesia that I'm showing you, not for any particular reason, but we did this for each market. What are the factors for switching to a paid online service that people openly discuss? And again, this is available through data sources like Twitter, where we could actually break this down, and the number one factor in Indonesia was actually content being the number one factor for why I would switch to a paid online streaming service. Something else we kind of looked at is the kind of TV series and TV watching culture versus a movie culture. And in Indonesia, it's still considered a very social thing to kind of go to the movies. So that has a lot of discussion versus watching Netflix or watching something online at this stage. So you'll see there's a 73% of the audience that was talking about going to the movies, watching movies, etc. Together. And we looked at something else, which was the 3 kind of stages on kind of discovery, selection, and discussion when it came to the type of TV show that you could watch. And we saw that, people in Indonesia would talk about, I love this or I hated this. They'd have their personal rankings for each show, like, Game of Thrones #1, something else #2, Friends #3. And they also shared their own kind of reviews, often without spoilers, that they, as a movie critic or a TV show critic, would have done. The last thing that I'm going to talk about here is looking at consumer profiles based on the data you can actually find people sharing online. And the profile we've been given was young local enthusiasts who are people that like to binge watch and they're kind of interested in lean back passive content, and they're tech forward and they're willing to pay more for it. But just looking at Twitter data, we were actually able to further segment this profile into 2 types of audiences, which were the movie and kind of TV marathoners and the on-the-go bingers. And your movie and TV marathoners, I feel like kind of resonate with a little bit of the Billie Eilish characteristics that Trisha was talking about this morning, which was they have no shame in kind of saying, like, I'm like, slacking at home today and I'm watching TV all day in bed. And they're almost doing it very openly online. Versus your kind of on-the-go bingers who are kind of like, I'm always on the go, I'm going to work, I'm going somewhere else, etc. And I've downloaded all of my shows and I'm going to watch it on my device. And then complain about the bad internet connection or something like that they have. So that's what I have from the study, but we just wanted to show you some examples on how deep you can actually get with social data. No other form of research was done by us, maybe by Twitter, but we were able to get very, very deep into answering some of Martin's very broad questions that he had given us to tackle.
I mean, thanks, Prerna. I think to what sort of the key sort of highlights for me. Let me just get one or two more slides left. Was a lot of this actually started around the flexibility, and again, I think one of the things that we're blessed with at Twitter is the ability to really drive some experimentation. We've got some projects that we keep in a cupboard and never going to show the light of day because they didn't work. But when we actually went back to our org within the business and we said, look, we want to start looking at our data in a different way. And the idea was that we pick subjects where, of course, these are commercially viable subjects for us. But the idea is to move away from the what we described as like the big number on screen, like 76% of people watch online content. That's great. That gets us 2 seconds of a client's level of engagement. But actually we wanted to move into the realm of truly understanding how these types of genres or how these types of modern day phenomena are being discussed on our platform. And that's that's where it was sort of great to work with companies like Circus. Because actually I think the one thing is these guys all almost sort of like share our vision on this as well. And the one thing I want to state is that if we don't do work like this, and I think we have to take a leadership role in this because I do feel like we were responsible for the previous sort of the more counting and the more sort of overt quantitative side of things. If we don't do that now, then I think the whole industry was destined to go down this sort of path-dependent nature. I'm not sure how many of you people have seen some of the most crazy examples of path-dependent nature. They sort of show you why, like Roman horses and carts decided how wide NASA space rockets were and things like this. But I really feel like this was sort of a key moment to change. And when we took this stuff to the client, one sort of client described it really as well as they were saying, oh, you guys are going for upper funnel. So they're basically saying, look, we're not talking about anything that's particularly, we're not talking about a particular campaign. What you're doing is you're helping us to understand the context by which we'll be entering your particular platform. And I think as Prerna was saying, the most amazing one was all the people in Indonesia, when they see the heavy rain coming, sort of jump out quickly, go grab some Wi-Fi, download something to watch, and then go back and continue the additional commute time which they have. And the client was the clients that we share this with, they're truly grateful and they're so much more engaged that we've brought something fresh to them. So, thank you very much. I think we have got time for a few quick questions if there's anything.
Yes, questions.
Yeah, thank you.